Sereia and the Frozen Lake. Evan walked along the snowy path along the shore of the frozen lake, with the stubborn gait of an old sailor. He occasionally covered his eyes with the palm of his hand, looking for a place where he would come to fish under the ice, when the ice on the lake was formed and thick enough to support a man's weight. The lake's surface was already covered with ice, but this ice was transparent, and under it, small fish could be seen swimming near the shore. The bottom of the lake was quite stony, so the water was always clean. The November sun shone slightly sideways, and its slanting rays penetrated everything around, as if saying goodbye to everything it had given life to in spring. Suddenly, a strange sound came from somewhere, as if someone was singing a song without words. The melody was so inviting, longing, and tender that Evan froze as if struck by thunder. Strange, who could sing here? And who would sing in this freezing wind? He thought, raising his hand to his eyes again and gazing into the distance. But then, a gust of wind brought him the louder sound of that chant. Evan realized it was coming from behind a rock that cut into the lake's water surface, which was covered with the first ice, dividing it into two parts, the part that Evan could see, and the part that was hidden from him by the rock. The man turned sharply and added a step. He was so interested in who could sing like that in this weather that he almost jogged around the cliff, approaching the opposite side. As Evan rounded the cliff, a strange picture opened before him. On the thin ice, at the very foot of the cliff, a woman lay on her side, almost unclothed. At least, that was what it seemed to Evan. But when he looked more closely, her body was covered with something shiny, like a long closed swimsuit of sky blue color. Her hair was red, very thick, and covered her shoulders, chest, and back. The stranger's legs were also covered with a shiny fabric or something similar. The woman was singing. Her eyes were closed, and her face was somber. The song flowed without interruption, only slightly hushed. Evan stood behind a tree growing near this cliff and looked at the beautiful stranger, mesmerized, listening to her singing. Suddenly, the woman stopped singing abruptly and looked back. Evan had no time to realize that she was beside him. The woman's scent was spicy and heady, like the sea. Her breath came from her lips in a light vapor in the light frost. Evan looked at her like he was guilty of something. Guilty of walking alone, guilty of being enchanted by this song, and going to see who was singing it. Evan straightened up and stepped away from the tree. Still, this stranger had found him, and hiding longer would have been pointless. "Who are you? What's your name?" the woman said in a melodious voice that made Evan's insides melt as if a fire was burning in his body. The young man's cheeks turned pink with embarrassment, but he answered immediately, "My name is Evan. What's yours?" The woman tilted her head slightly, and her hair, studded with glittering droplets of ice, fell over her face. She flicked her hair back with her hand, and Evan noticed her arm was also covered in cloth with a strange pattern that looked like a fish scale. The woman smiled slightly and replied, "Sereia. My name is Sereia. But you won't remember that name. It's too old-fashioned for your time." Evan somehow automatically replied, unable to tear away this woman's beautiful green eyes. "Of course I'll remember your name. Sereia." Sereia was still standing nearby when Evan dared to look closer at her. The woman had her back to the sun and was surrounded by a halo of sparkling light. Evan noticed something strange about the way her clothes glistened on her. She was not wet. The woman was not wearing a swimsuit, she had no clothes. Out of embarrassment, Evan faded away. He did not understand what had gotten into him. How could he talk to this Sereia when she was practically unclothed, only her thick hair covered her body? But Sereia felt nothing unnatural about the situation. The woman suddenly reached out and touched Evan's cheek with her fingers. "And you're pretty," she said in a melodious voice. "Do you have a girlfriend?" Evan was even more embarrassed. "No, not right now," he answered dazedly. "But there was once." "Ah, then your heart is as broken as mine," Sereia said slowly. "But why you, such an attractive guy, still have not found a new life friend and are walking around here alone?" She cautiously continued questioning. "With your good looks you could work on improving your self-confidence, and things would immediately form." Evan looked at her with even more amazement. This amazing woman so bluntly told him, a guy suffering from insecurity, that he was attractive. Yeah, he was just dreaming. "No, we broke up amicably. I just have found no one who compares to her." "And why am I telling this stranger such a personal part of my life?" The thought raced through his head and immediately disappeared. Evan wanted to keep talking to this woman, so he will tell her about his whole life. Sereia, still not taking her icy fingers off his cheek, replied, "Well, you could get any woman if you wanted to. You're such an attractive man." Evan even stepped back from Sereia, so impressed he was by her words. Indeed, she finds him attractive. Who could never get a girl he liked as a friend, let alone a romantic relationship? Evan met his first and so far only girlfriend on her initiative, and on her initiative, they broke up some time later. He had no one else, and this unwanted feeling sometimes depressed the guy, especially when all his friends came to parties with beautiful girlfriends. He was alone, and no girls came to meet him. I don't want easy dating. I want my new relationships to be strong and long-lasting for life," Evan suddenly blurted out. "And why am I telling such intimate thoughts to this stranger? Because I like her so much," he thought, looking at this beautiful woman. Sereia looked at him affectionately and seemed to understand everything. Evan stepped towards her again, and they were at arm's length apart. The woman did not make a single movement. She seemed willing to stand there and stare at Evan indefinitely. Sereia only raised her head higher to look directly into Evan's eyes, for he was almost a head taller than she was. But then, a bird flew over them with a sharp cry. The magic of that extraordinary moment evaporated, and reality returned to the young people. Sereia anxiously raised her head and gazed at the silhouette of that bird, clearly outlined by the sun's rays. "I have to go," she whispered, lowering her head. "Time with you is over." Stay a few more minutes," begged Evan. He did not want to lose this beautiful woman who spoke affectionately to him. And she was so attractive. "I can't stay with you, Evan." "But why? Don't go. You complained to yourself that I was attractive. Why did you tease me with such talk, and now you're leaving?" With despair in his voice, Evan cried out. "I'm not allowed to be with you. I've already broken the ban and touched you. Which means I will be punished for my intemperance. For many centuries I have been here, and all was well, until you came along and disturbed my peace." Despair rang in Sereia's voice as well. "Before I saw you, everything was fine, but now? A lot of hundreds? I understand nothing. But what will happen to you now?" shrieked Evan. "Don't be afraid. I can protect you. Tell me only what the matter is. What threatens you?" Thank you, my knight. This is what I've been waiting for all these years and centuries, for someone to volunteer to protect me. Here I am hearing these words, and they may help me break a spell cast on me centuries ago to live in this lake forever, and only come out when there are no humans around, when the lake is just icing over. Evan stood and stared at Sereia without saying a word. Her words meant she might be released from her spell and reappear on the shores of this lake on only frosty November days, meaning that he could someday sit her up again. These thoughts raced through Evan's mind like a herd of wild horses. Sereia continued the story. No, you can't do anything for me. Thank you for giving me these minutes of talking to you. I will remember you for the rest of my life. And I have a long time to live, much longer than you. And you will always be so young and beautiful in my memory, Sereia sadly replied. Wait, but where are you going? You can't swim there anymore, there's ice. Evan cried out in despair. He did not know how else to stop Sereia and make her stay with him for at least a couple more minutes. Evan also did not want to realize where exactly Sereia was going to go back to, but one thing was clear. She was heading back to the lake, the surface of which was covered in ice. Don't worry, it means nothing to me. I live there, deep in the lake, and it's warm, well, it's warm enough for me to survive. Evan suddenly realized this woman was going back into the lake's water. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he shrieked. So what are you? You're a mermaid? Sereia, who had already turned her back on him and was heading back towards the lake, looked at him obliquely and replied. Yes, I am a mermaid. Evan reached out to her, trying to stop her, and said words that did not really mean anything. He just wanted to keep Sereia close to him for a moment longer. Wait, is it true? Yes, it's true. The woman replied calmly. Sereia lowered her gaze, and Evan saw a diamond tear trickle down her cheek. And, turning toward the lake again, she continued her way toward it. Evan, unable to do anything, stood still. His feet were as if pinned to the ground. His arms were like stakes, and they seemed to weigh now 2 poodles each. Sereia was getting farther and farther away from him. Here, she stepped onto the thin ice and walked lightly across it. Evan watched in amazement as she stepped on the thin ice, which did not break under her weight. She seemed to weigh nothing. But 5 meters from the shore, Sereia turned to Evan and waved goodbye. He did not have time to say goodbye or wave, but the woman folded her arms above her head and dove straight into the ice. In fact, she went straight into the water. A light splash confirmed that there was an ice hole there that Evan could not see from afar. The young man looked disappointed at the lake's empty surface. The ice was still transparent, but from afar, he could not see which way Sereia had gone. A year has passed. Evan tried to eliminate Sereia's image during this time, but it did not work well. He kept dreaming about this woman, and it seemed she was right next to him, and in a moment, he could touch her hand. But then the image blurred, the dream passed, and Evan was in a reality where he did not like anyone else. In some strange way, quite attractive women appeared around him in standard companies with friends and colleagues, who suddenly paid attention to him. Evan suddenly turned into a rather successful businessman from a modest guy, making him attractive in women's eyes. But none of them could attract him. Evan's friends joked among themselves that he was under some kind of spell. He attracted women, but he did not need them, or, rather, he did not need those particular women. Everyone already knew that Evan spent almost all of his free time on the shore of the lake, sitting by one cliff. Evan would return to the spot where he had met Sereia, hoping to see her again. But nothing was happening, and it was becoming increasingly frustrating for the man. However, he did not give up. Remembering that time in Sereia's world runs differently, much slower than in his world, Evan came to the shore of the lake and waited for when he could hear the magical voice of the beautiful mermaid again and see her once more, at least once more in his life. It was all for nothing. Evan went to a party at his friend's house on a beautiful November evening. Oddly chosen by the house's owner, the pool was filled to the top with water that was already covered with a thin crust of ice. Evan looked longingly at the surface of the pool and turned away. He did not want useless memories to interfere with his life. His parents were expecting grandchildren, and he needed to start a family at least for their sake, who had lovingly raised him and his brothers. The house was full of guests. The host of the house and party greeted Evan warmly and offered him a glass of champagne. Evan accepted the glass from the host's hands, but did not touch the wine. He did not need to. He only looked around at the people, greeting acquaintances and introducing himself to strangers. Suddenly, he saw the silhouette of a woman in the doorway. Dressed in a tight sea wave-colored dress with the seductive curves of a plastic body, the stranger stood with her back to Evan. Her luxurious hair glinted copper in the light of the lamps. A crowd of men had gathered around her, offering her a glass of wine or treats. Most of the men were trying to get close to her to show that they were in favor of her. The women looked at this lady with jealousy as they realized she was winning them all over. And then the woman turned around. Evan's heart sank with delight. It was her, Sereia. He recognized her before she even turned around. He felt his heart race in anticipation of happiness. The feeling was so strong that he had to lean against the wall to keep from staggering. Sereia, it was really her, also froze. The woman looked at Evan as if she was about to tell him something important. As if in a dream, Evan took a couple of steps towards her. Suddenly, he realized Sereia was already beside him, holding his hand and looking affectionately into his eyes. You here?" whispered Evan admiringly, not daring to touch her. "Yes, I am like that, unpredictable. Now I'm here with you," she replied, wrapping her arms around his waist. The surrounding men parted, looking at Evan in surprise. His ratings suddenly skyrocketed because next to him was the one in whom each of them was now so interested, and each of them thought he pleased her. Evan's ex-girlfriend was also there. She watched with sudden jealousy as Evan hugged this beautiful girl, around whom half of her classmates had just crowded. Evan's ex felt hurt, even though she had left the poor guy and found a better guy than him. But when her new friend was staring at this beautiful woman, she realized that now her Evan had outplayed them all. This lovely woman was flattered by him. Evan was looking at her, his new girlfriend, with rapt attention. No one could understand what connected these different people, this nerd who did not know how to dress and attract women, and this wild beauty named Sereia. What did Sereia see in him? Why did she want him? What do you think? The end. Written by Misha Quinn, 2024. All rights reserved by Misha Quinn, 2024.